On today's show, the Hawks implode in the second half in Miami. We'll break it down from every angle, tell you what to actually take away from this game, and much more. All that is coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1918 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Rowland, coming to you on a Wednesday evening into Thursday. And I want to encourage you at the top of the show, as I always do, to make us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Check us out and subscribe to the podcast anywhere you find your podcasts. We're on Apple. We're on Spotify. We're also on YouTube. Please like the video as you are watching it. Spread the word about the podcast. And I appreciate you joining us as always. Today's show will focus on what became a pretty bad, disappointing loss for the Hawks. 131-109 down in Miami. It was a rematch after the Hawks did pull out a gritty home victory on Monday against the Heat. This same team, 48 hours later, it was a totally different game, much more offensive focused, even when it was not going that badly for the Hawks in the first half. But after a back and forth first half, they were down by 11 points before halftime, got it back to a tie game at the half, and then actually led early in the third quarter at times. But then the Hawks allowed a 26-6 run by the Heat at the end of the third quarter into the fourth quarter, and that broke the game open towards Miami on the way to what became a blowout win for the Heat and a bad loss again, a lopsided loss for the Hawks in this spot. And, you know, quite honestly, the Hawks did not play well in this game. Like that's the reality is one game out of 82. That's still the case. I tend to be a little bit more even-handed on these things than fans are, which is totally fine. I get the reactions, I get the frustration, and it was a bad performance. Make no mistake, this is a bad performance from the Hawks. No way around that whatsoever. At the same time, you know, some of it was luck-based, some of it was performance-based. They didn't play well, and it was a disaster, particularly in the second half. And look, I got to begin here. Defensively, it was very, very rough for Atlanta. In fact, on a per-possession basis, it was the worst game of the season for Atlanta. They allowed 1.39 points per possession in this game, almost a 140 defensive rating. That is the worst of the year for Atlanta. And it's kind of crazy after the Hawks had one of their best defensive games of the season on Monday against the same opponent. It was the complete opposite in this game. And look, I said the same thing on Monday. To be consistent, I did note on Monday that some of what happened on Monday was the Heat missed a lot of shots. And tonight, the Hawks didn't play as well, to be very clear, especially if you watch the game on the rewatch, it was even more evident. The Hawks were not executing as well as they did on Monday, but the Hawks were not as good as the numbers indicated on Monday defensively, and they probably weren't as bad as the numbers indicated tonight, but they did get much worse. And that kind of nuance and context is definitely important. Miami had either their best or second best offensive game of the season for their team, depending on how you feel about this game that they had against the Lakers. I didn't watch, but just by the numbers, and there's this game in December where they were awesome. But this is the only game that was even close to that. Miami definitely had its best shooting night of the year. So the Heat had 76% true shooting in this game. That is comfortably a season high for Miami. They shot 54.8% from three, also a season high. They hit 23 three-pointers in this game. Also, their second most of the year behind their actual season high, which was 24. So, look, some of that is crazy shooting. I'll always give you the context here, but the duo of Davion Mitchell and Kel'el Ware, not exactly two full-on snipers at this stage. Both guys career 33% three-point shooters at the NBA level. Those guys combined to shoot 7 of 7 from three in this game. If you add in Haywood Highsmith, who's a pretty decent shooter and a good player, but not Duncan Robinson, not Tyler Hero, those three guys were 11 of 12 from three. So even if every look was wide open, you would never project those guys to make 11 of 12 threes. But importantly, it was still bad defense. The Hawks were bad defensively, particularly after halftime. The stretch in the third quarter and the fourth quarter, we'll get into that more later on, but it was truly ugly stuff at times from Atlanta, and Miami, to their credit, took advantage of it in full. The one and only bright spot defensively for the Hawks in this game was 17 turnovers that they created in a slow-paced game, so that was actually pretty good. Some good havoc stuff from the Hawks. And they rebounded the ball okay on the glass, but I will say that when they didn't rebound well on the defensive glass in this game, it turned out to be an absolute disaster. So Quinn Snyder said this in his post-game, kind of unprompted in some respects, but about how impactful Miami's second chance opportunities were in this game. And they led a lot of them to open threes. And after watching the game again for a second time, that was very obviously the case on film. Miami, how about this stat? Miami had 8 offensive rebounds in the whole game. That's not a crazy high number. Even when they shoot the ball well, that's a very low number, actually. But those 8 offensive rebounds turned into 20 second chance points. They averaged 2.5 points per offensive rebound. That's crazy. That means they made 4 threes at least, if not 5. And to kind of do the math on that, it's just that's going to be painful. And that some of those breakdowns, again, there's some luck involved in there, but still some bad defensive breakdowns from Atlanta. And I'll get into this more in depth later on in the podcast, but the bench for the Hawks got absolutely torched in this game, particularly in the second half. In fact, the 4 guys who play off the bench for Atlanta, and that is in no order, Terrence Mann, Karis LeVert, Clay Capella, and George Niang, they were all minus 17 or worse in the second half. And particularly the duo of Niang and Capella, I thought it was very obviously Niang's worst game as a Hawk so far. Small sample size, obviously, but he was bad in this game. And the Capella was also highly ineffective. And really the one stretch that kind of decided the game in the second half, that 26-6 run, was that bench unit getting blown off the floor defensively, and they just could not defend with Capella and Niang on the court. In fact, those guys both had about 150 defensive ratings in the game. They were not alone. I think a couple other guys were up there, and really nobody's defensive numbers were good in this game, but it was particularly bad in that stretch, number one, and also number two, all night long when it was Niang and Capella in the front court. It just didn't work in this matchup. Doesn't mean it'll never work again, but it was really rough from those guys. And look, overall, that was obviously the theme of this game, is the Hawks which were not good enough defensively. And look, this is a key point. And, I've said it all year long, and I'll say it again now. The Hawks have actually had a pretty good defensive season. They had their best defensive numbers this year that they've had since 2017. This does not mean that they're a bad defensive team overall. I saw a lot of that reaction tonight. That's silly, and I get it. It's frustration-based, and that's justified after how bad this game was. But the Hawks have actually been pretty good defensively at times this year, and okay on the whole this year. Tonight was a disaster, and there's no way around it. I don't use that word flippantly. It was that bad defensively at times, and Miami, again, took advantage of it in full. Offensively, the Hawks were actually pretty good through 3 quarters. They had a 127 offensive rating at the end of the third quarter, and they were down by, I think it was 14 points still, which tells you how bad the defense was at that point in time. But then they scored 16 points on 21 possessions in the fourth quarter. Now, part of that was that the game got away from them a little bit, but it became a rock fight, all that stuff in the fourth quarter. But the offense was not the problem at all. In fact, they had 61% true shooting as a team in the game. They did turn the ball over too much. 17 turnovers in this game. That is not great, and it was kind of equal opportunity. I think everyone except for Capella had at least one, and multiple guys had multiple turnovers in this game. That's tough to kind of withstand if you're the Hawks. They were just okay on the margins. They had pretty good balance offensively, but nothing special. But I want to be very clear. The offense was good enough for most of this game to win it. It was that they couldn't get stops. And not what you expect. The same 2 teams played a game that was 98-86 on Monday. Similar injury reports, all the same stuff. The NBA is a different league night to night. Like, guys make shots, guys don't make shots, etc. And I'm not excusing it. People always accuse me of saying, throwing out this. You're making excuses. No, I'm explaining what it is. I'm not on the team. It is what it is. I'm a neutral arbiter of what's going on here. At the same time, this is one of those nights where the second half in particular was just hard to watch. If you're a Hawks fan, I don't blame anyone for being mad about this performance. It was really bad. And I would separate it also. I saw a lot of people like, okay, the Hawks are 1-3 the last 4. That's terrible. Well, it's very different. I would say the Hawks played well enough to win in both losses to Detroit and Orlando. They lost those games. They were basically coin flip games. Pre-game, during the game, how they played out, they're very close games. Those games were pretty much like 48-52 kind of games. They were right there in both of them. Monday, they played better overall, but they didn't dominate. But they won a game that they played well enough to win on Monday. Tonight was the outlier of those 4 games. And yeah, would it be better if they were 2-2 in the last 4? Absolutely, it would be. But they weren't. And this is the only time since the All-Star break the Hawks have played poorly. In fact, the Hawks haven't played a game like this in a long time. They lost a bunch of games before the All-Star break and all that stuff as well. But if you look at it, the Hawks haven't had a game, and I looked back at this, where I thought they actually played poorly in the entire month of February until tonight. They had a game in Cleveland on January 30th that they lost pretty badly, that it got away from them. But in February, coming into tonight, their losses were by this many points: 5, 1, 1 in overtime, 6, 5. And then tonight, they were competitive in every loss. Now, does that make – this is the NBA. I'm not saying it's like, great, you don't want moral victories, but context is important to say the Hawks have not been getting blown off the floor. Tonight, they were bad. It was bad. I'm not excusing that. They played very, very poorly defensively and on the whole, and especially in the second half. But, always encourage people not to panic too much, but I understand people reacting the way they want to react. And my job is to kind of try to give a little bit of nuance, a little bit of context, just take a half step back and say, this is a rough one. It doesn't mean the sky is falling, but it was a rough performance, and we'll get into it. It was equal opportunity blame. I thought Quinn had a rough night. We'll talk about more later on in this podcast. But overall, a rough one for the Hawks, and we'll get into more detail in just one moment. Today's show is sponsored by Robinhood Gold. With Robinhood Gold, you can now enjoy the VIP treatment, receiving a 3% IRA match on retirement contributions. The privileges of the very privileged are no longer exclusive. With Robinhood Gold, your annual IRA contributions are boosted by 3%, plus you can get 4% APY on your cash in non-retirement accounts. That is over 8 times the national savings average. The perks of the high net worth are now available for any net worth. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. To receive your 3% boost on annual IRA contributions, sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rates subject to change. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold $5 a month from 1 year from first match. Must keep funds in IRA for 5 years. Go to robinhood.com/boost. Over 8 times the national average savings account interest rate claim is based on the data from the FDIC as of November 18th, 2024. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold LLC. All right, and if you are a new listener to the podcast, what we do in the second segment, generally speaking, after games, is kind of break down more granular thoughts about what actually happened, how the game unfolded, my notes and observations. And I already teased it earlier, the first half was not incredible, but the Hawks did some good stuff in the first half. The shot making on both sides of this game was much better early on, and that continued for the most part until the end. The Hawks made 4 of their first 5 threes. The Hawks did win an early challenge that was kind of funny. Like, I don't love it when the Hawks challenge out of bounds calls in the first quarter, but this one was obvious enough where it was the right move. And with the rule change a couple of years ago, where now you get multiple if you get the first one right, that allows you to kind of use your first one on a kind of 100% win probability, as the Hawks did in that moment. Also, by the way, I recommend reading this piece from Steph No, good friend of mine from the Sporting News, who actually is based in Atlanta. He wrote about challenges this week extensively at Sporting News. It's always like a controversial thing, and especially because the Hawks had a pretty bad one over the weekend that I criticized heavily in a loss. But that was a good piece from Steph, and the Hawks have actually been pretty decent in challenges on the whole this year. Anyway, it was the usual 9-man group for the Hawks rotationally. I didn't love the distribution, as we'll get into a little bit more later on, but the bench unit was basically, Mann, LeVert, Capella, and Niang, plus the starters. It was Mo Gay's 6th straight start. He actually was okay in this one. He was not the problem. Although he wasn't fantastic, he was not the problem in this game. Hawks had a pretty good job, I thought, in the first time that Trey sat on the bench in this game after a really comical offensive performance without Trey on Monday. They were better in this game at times without him, offensively kind of being more aggressive, driving to the rim, which was helpful. They were down by 1 at the end of the first quarter. It did allow another run. I already noted it as we get into later on. The Hawks gave up the big run in the third quarter, but they actually allowed a run in the second quarter as well. It was a 13-0 run. Couple threes. They scored 10 points to the Heat in about 90 seconds. Duncan Robinson hit 4 threes in the quarter, and the Hawks were a little bit rough there defensively. I didn't love the sub pattern in the first half, which is actually funny looking at my notes right now because I'm going to bring up again in the second half. They played the bench unit a little bit too long in the first half too. It wasn't quite as glaring as the second half, but I thought it was a little bit too long. Also, they played Capella and Mo Gay together for about a minute, and that was a disaster. I would never do that, essentially. That should essentially never happen in my opinion, but there you go. The Hawks were down by 11 points mid-second quarter and then actually chipped away quite a bit, I thought. Offensively settling in a lot, I would say. Against Miami's zone, it was a little bit uncomfortable, as Quinn kind of noted again post-game after a question by Bob Rathman. But I thought that they did a good job eventually settling in against that zone. It was just kind of flummoxing early on against it. But it was the total opposite of Monday, where every shot was falling on both sides. They were able to – the Hawks were actually hot too before halftime, shooting 60% from the field. And we were able to kind of tie the game before the half. I thought it was a good half from Terrence Mann in particular, and then Okongwu and Dyson Daniels all played well before halftime. In the second half, early on, it was the Mo Gay roller coaster. He had 2 really nice flash plays, a big-time finish and dunk off a pass by Trey, and then he had a corner 3. But then he also had 3 fouls, and at least 2 of them were really bad fouls for shooting fouls, just kind of in the wrong spots. Like Mo, you kind of saw in that one sample of about 5 minutes, like why Mo plays but doesn't play more. Like the highs are high, but that position is a little bit in flux right now. And I thought Mo kind of showed all sides of what the Mo Gay experience has been recently. Trey was good in the third quarter, though. He scored or assisted on 13 points in like a 5-minute span offensively. It was a great pass by Ricochet to Dyson on a behind-the-back look for a dunk. But then the bottom fell out. So it was a 26-6 overall run by Miami over about 6 minutes to go from up by 3 to down by 17. And essentially, that was the game. The Hawks never recovered from that. The Heat were, to their credit, again, on fire. Really, that entire stretch, really the entire game, they were on fire. There is some nuance there. And also, I wanted to at least circle this. Again, it was the defense that was the problem for the Hawks in this game, but they missed 3 consecutive wide open threes at the end of the third quarter. That might have stopped the bleeding a little bit. And sometimes when you miss shots and your opponent's red hot, it tends to spiral on you. And that kind of happened. I think Quinn even said something about their spirit. Something, I can't remember how he noted it, but he kind of noted like when you miss shots and you can't get stops, it kind of tends to build on itself. And then I thought that happened at the end of the third quarter. It's not an excuse about the defense, which was bad the entire way through. But if they had made 1 or 2 of those, maybe they stabilize a little bit and they stay in the game. Instead, you're down by 20 and it's kind of over. Part of that, again, was that Mitchell and Ware combined to make 7 consecutive threes in the second half. And look, to be fair, a couple of those were really good looks, but they made them all, which matters. And Miami had 23s at that point in time through about 40 minutes. And here's what I'll talk about the rotation a little bit. So the way I put it on Twitter was I thought that Quinn, look, if there's a criticism of Quinn that I think is reasonable at times, is that he's quite rigid with rotations. Like, not necessarily always in a bad way. I think fans don't like it when guys don't call timeouts or change rotations when things are not going well. And I get that. I'm a little bit more on the understanding side of being rigid with rotations. It's a long season. But I thought it was pretty glaring in this game that the Hawks couldn't get stops with that second unit, in particular the Niang-Capella pairing against what Miami was running. Miami's very well coached. Like, I don't always enjoy watching the Heat play, to be very honest with you, but Spo is very, very good, like Hall of Fame level good. And I think he did a good job attacking what the Hawks couldn't do. And the Niang-Capella are very slow. That's part of it. It's not the whole thing, but they're very slow, and they are. And the Heat took advantage of that. Again, it helps them that they made every shot. That's tough. But I thought it was pretty obvious that the Hawks needed to get some sort of different lineup on the court. They sat Dyson and Okongwu for a long time. And look, guys have to rest. I always find it's like, all right, well, somebody has to sit at some point. And the reactions are what they are. But I thought it was very clear to me that they needed to get that lineup off the floor. Not entirely, but just like separate Niang-Capella, go a little bit smaller, something else to do something to stop the bleeding there. And when Okongwu had been playing well in the game, the Hawks actually did a good job with Okongwu on the court the whole game. They were pretty competitive defensively. They weren't great. I think they had like a 130 defensive rating, which is not good, but they were like reasonable with Okongwu on the court defensively, and they weren't when he wasn't. And then, Dyson is, of course, Dyson defensively, who changes a lot of things. So I'm not going to rant and rave the way that some are, but I understand totally. Like, that was frustrating. I thought that was poor from Quinn. I think he needs to be better than at that point in time, and he is too rigid at times. I think it could be overstated, but he is too rigid, and that's shown through. Does that mean that they would have won the game? Probably not, to be honest with you. I think a lot of it was like they were already down by 15 before it was like, all right, they can't keep doing this anymore. Maybe it was 10 or 12, whatever you want to say. They probably lose the game anyway, but it would have been more competitive, I think, if they had done something different there to get that lineup off the court and stop the bleeding. They didn't, and that was that. So by the end, it was basically over with 10 minutes to go, if not more. They got it to 15, 16. It wasn't like totally dead, but the Hawks were pretty much dead at that stage. And we'll get into kind of the player-by-player stuff, but I thought it was a situation where there were lineups that just didn't work in this game, and that happens. But also, you look up, and by the end of the game, every player in the Hawks lineup, 1 through 9, had a negative net rating. Now, Okongwu was the best, which I think was backed up by the eye test. I thought Okongwu, Dyson, Trey did their jobs, and even honestly, even LeVert and Mann were like okay for the whole game. But in the end, it got away from them, and we'll get into more of the individual stuff in just 1 second. Today's show is sponsored by DoorDash. NBA fans, get ready. They swoosh, you save. Thanks to Dash Pass, every time a player drops 50 points or more in a game, you score a huge deal the next day at DoorDash. It's simple. When any player 50 points or more in a game during the 2024-25 NBA season, Dash members actually get 50% off in order up to $10 off the next day from noon until midnight after an epic 50-point performance. Celebrate by ordering wings or pizza or burgers from your favorite spot delivered straight to your door. Or perhaps if you're a night owl like I happen to be, honestly, and you need a midnight snack, perhaps use Dash Pass to grab something delicious while saving big. Or if you want lunch on the go, you also use Dash Pass to get your favorite meals and have $0 delivery fees and reduced service fees as well. Plus, now you save even more with this exclusive NBA offer. Sign up for Dash Pass and be ready to save when any player has 50 points or more in a game. Dashboard members get 50% off and order the next day up to $10 off. Use the promo code NBA50 from noon until midnight on a 50-point game on eligible orders of participating merchants. Must have an active Dash Pass account. Terms apply. Visit DoorDash to learn more. All right, we'll dive in now to how the individual performances unfolded. And again, if you're a new listener, we'll be doing that in this last segment. Usually post-game is talk about all the players who appeared on the court for the Hawks. 3 guys were active and did not play. It's been the case now for a while. Of course, they have the 4 guys injured, Helema, Jalen Johnson, but also V. Krejci, Larry Nance Jr., etc. So the 3 guys who have been active and not playing, Don Barlow, Garrison Matthews, Keaton Wallace, there you go. But the four guys who put off the bench, Capella had a rough game, to be sure. I thought defensively he was much worse than usual, honestly. He finished okay around the rim, 4 of 6. Also took a 3. Now, granted, that got a lot of reaction online, but if you watch the play, it was with 1 on the shot clock and it wasn't his fault. But the memes are funny. I will certainly acknowledge that. Even as a Capella defender, generally speaking, I thought, A, he was bad in this game, and B, the 3 was just funny, but it wasn't his fault. That was actually probably Trey's fault. It was kind of a flaming bag that he threw to Capella. It's like, that's the one guy you can't throw the ball to there to get a shot off. But anyway, 4 or 5 on 2s. He had 8.3 rebounds and 2 assists, but just was not good defensively as a lost game for him. Niang, as I said before, had a really rough one. Part of that is they didn't make shots. And Niang, I do think that people, and I predicted this at the time of the trade, if you listen to the show, I predicted that when he had bad shooting nights, people were going to lose their mind, because if the ball is not going in the basket for Niang, with his body type and his lack of foot speed, people are going to focus on him and act like he's this worst player of all time. And he's not. He's not. He's actually not the worst defender of all time even. But he's not a good defender, and he has limitations, and they were very much magnified in this game. So that Niang-Capella duo in some matchups might be viable. I think, honestly, it might help sometimes to have Niang shooting with Capella. But in this game, defensively, those guys did not work. And then Niang also couldn't get a shot to go down. He had a couple of errant passes, I thought, in this one as well. Minus 19, both those guys, and it felt that way for sure. Terrence Mann, good first half, I thought. As I said before, 13 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists for Terrence. Quiet second half. He wasn't like the problem, but wasn't like a big part of the solution either after halftime. But a good half before halftime, as a lot of guys did. Karis LeVert, 17 points on 12 shots, 3 or 4 from 2, 3 8 from 3, 2 rebounds, 2 assists, and 2 steals. I thought he was fine, generally speaking. Played 32 minutes, was pretty good. Nothing spectacular, but certainly was fine. To the starters, Mo Gay again, 12 minutes, 5 points, 1 rebound. It was offensive, so 0 defensive rebounds. Had a turnover, -7. I do wonder if they might change the lineup, not because of Mo Gay, but after they won Monday, they were obviously not going to change it, I don't think, going into Wednesday. But they're playing the Thunder on Friday. The Thunder are an interesting team. Mo Gay is not unplayable, but I think they might try Don Barlow at some point. They might try to go Ricochet more at the 4. Here's an opportunity for me to say this out loud. So this does seem very self-explanatory to me in some respects, but I'm finding it that people just are almost ignoring that Jalen Johnson is not playing. It's driving me kind of crazy because, look, I'm not saying that the Hawks would be a title team with Jalen Johnson. They wouldn't. But when you miss your second best player, it does matter. And positionally, I've seen a lot of freakouts about the power forward position, and it's well, yeah, you take away the starting power forward was playing 35 minutes a game, and yeah, that position's pretty weak at this point in time. George Niang is a very good backup power forward. He's not a good starting power forward. That's a reality. That's very plain and probably too general of a statement, but it's true. Mo Gay, same thing. Mo Gay is a developmental player right now. He's talented. He's got upside, but he's not a great NBA player at this moment in time. So, it's also easy to understand why that would be, but I understand it's a wins and losses business. And anyway, I just wanted to say that out loud because it's kind of vexing me because, yeah, it doesn't mean that you excuse everything else. The Hawks still have enough to win games. I'm not saying they don't, but it does really matter that Jalen Johnson is not playing. It's a very relevant piece of context. All right, to the rest of the starters. Ricochet had a pretty good game, I thought. 11 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists. He was minus 18. That was not his fault, I didn't think, in this game whatsoever. He only took 6 shots from the field. He probably should have been a little bit more aggressive offensively, but I thought he did a lot of little things well and played well. He bounced back after a rough shooting game on Monday. Okongwu ended up only actually being 13 points on 15 shots, but I thought he was better than that most of the night. Was 5 of 13 on twos, though. Kind of a weird finishing game for him. 9 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 steals, and 1 steal and 2 blocks. I thought he played pretty well despite the finishing issues. And honestly, had a really good month of February, generally speaking. I thought Okongwu's been like sneakily pretty good and not getting enough credit for it. The passing has really played up, and I get it. There's a contingent that just cannot see beyond him being 6'8". I do understand that, but he's a good player, and he's been playing well, generally speaking. Lastly, Trae Young, 17 points, 8 assists on, 17 points on 15 shooting possessions. Not great. He was not the problem. He was fine. Miami does a good job on Trae. That's always been the case. That was the case again tonight. He got where he wanted to go most of the time, but I thought he was just okay. If not, it wasn't like anything special from him by his standards for sure. And then Dyson was pretty good offensively, 18 points on 11 shots, 5 assists, 5 rebounds, 2 steals. He was probably their best player in this game. He was really good. Dyson's been really good all year long, especially lately. But not a whole lot to be excited about. There were some guys who didn't play badly, I will say. And again, the offense was pretty good for a large portion of this game, but defensively, it just was not enough for the Hawks in this spot. So I'll leave you with this. I get it. I shouldn't even look at my mentions sometimes after games because it's just frustration boiling over. I do think that broadly speaking, some of the expectations are maybe a little bit out of whack right now, but also I understand the Hawks just played 4 teams that they're battling with directly, and that leads to more frustration when you lose. So there's that. But the Hawks are still in totally fine shape right now. They're not going to win the title this year. We all understand that, I think. At least they hope they do. But they do have a 5-game lead on the 10 seed and a 4-game lead on the 10 seed and a 5.5-game lead on the 11 spot right now. They're still very likely to be in the play-in somewhere. And yes, if you were still holding out hope that the Hawks might be the 6th seed post-Jalen injury, I would have been skeptical of that the whole time. And now I think they're 5 games back of that. So 6 games back of that. So that's probably out the window. But 7 and 8 still very much in play. This is a not super easy schedule stretch of time. And look, one piece of clarity that I will say at the end of the podcast, I often cite the point spreads. Our friends at FanDuel sponsor the podcast, do a great job. I don't always do that from a gambling perspective. I'm doing that because, and I've said this before, but if you're a new listener or someone doesn't always follow this, that's not the reason why I share those numbers on Twitter, or it's for context purposes. And it's been repeatedly proven, whether you are into sports betting, whether you're against it, that's your business. But one thing is, it's been repeatedly proven that the point spread, especially the closing point spread, like right before the game starts, is the best publicly available predictor of what a game is going to be. Doesn't mean anything about betting, just that it's basically just a projection. Think about it that way. And the Hawks were underdogs in 3 of the last 4 games. They lost those 3 games. They were small favorites. They were 1-point favorite in the game they won. They won that game. Now, to be very clear, that does not excuse tonight's performance. The Hawks were a small underdog in this game, and they got killed. That is not okay. I'm not saying otherwise. Nor am I saying that the Hawks are supposed to lose every game that they're underdogs in and win every game that they're favorites in. I'm not saying that either. But 1-3 against this lineup of teams in the last 4 is different than 1-3 against teams that you're supposed to beat. That is just very plainly what I'm saying. At the same time, would it have been good to steal one of those first 2 games against Detroit and Orlando? Yes. But if you go just by the projection systems and the point spreads, and again, you don't have to like this, I get it. But the Hawks are probably projected to win like 1.5 out of these 4 games. They won 1 instead of 2. That's not great. It's frustrating, but it's my job to kind of maybe anger you by pointing that stuff out in level-headed fashion. You don't have to like it, but I feel obliged to say that at the end of the podcast. All right. So looking ahead a little bit, I think I'm going to have a podcast on Thursday evening with some mailbag questions, etc. But in the event that I don't, or just because I'm looking ahead a little bit, the Hawks do play the Thunder on Friday. Now, that is not the team you want to see when you've lost 4 out of the last 5, because the Thunder are pretty darn good. They're the West favorites right now. It is a home game, but the Thunder are 47-11. That's an uphill battle. Now, it's not impossible to win. The Hawks have actually done a really good job against great teams this year. They've beaten Cleveland twice. They've beaten Boston. Like, they can win this game on Friday. But they will be underdogs for sure. And whether you like point spread stuff or not, I think it's pretty objective to say the Thunder are better than the Hawks. So we'll see how they play in that game, how they respond to this. The Hawks have been, I use this word probably too much, but the Hawks have been resilient this year. They have not had a lot of stretches where they actually just gotten walloped multiple times. When they lose a game like this, they tend to bounce back and play pretty well. Now, the only time all year long that they've had multiple losses like this in a row was on the West Coast trip in January. They lost 2 or 3 in a row like this, and it was frustrating. But that was, Sans Jail and all that stuff. We'll see how they fare. That's all I'll say. And I think, again, I'm planning to have a podcast on Thursday with some more context stuff, and we'll see what mailbag questions roll in. Speaking of, if you have mailbag questions, you can send them to me and or follow me on social media. We are, as a show, on Twitter/X at Locked On Hawks. I am there at BT Rowland. Send questions there. Also, send the questions if you want to lockedonhawks@gmail.com. That's the email address for the show. Also follow my non-podcast work at patreon.com/BT Rowland. And I appreciate everyone listening to the podcast. Please also subscribe to the show. If you're watching or listening to this, go ahead and do us that favor and that solid. Also subscribe, rate, review, et cetera, et cetera. Support the show the best way you can. If you made it to the end of the show after a blowout loss, you are probably a sicko, which I definitely appreciate. And it's not go unnoticed. But thank you for listening. As always, we'll have more coming up later on this week. And we'll see you all next time.